Good evening and welcome back to the European Sprint Pure Driving School Series Top Split broadcast race presented by Total Sim Sport. And we're already into week 3. We're coming to you from lovely sunny Monza in Italy. My name's Chris Rowlands. I'm joined today on cameras and co-commentary by Sean Cranley-Swash. And in a second, we'll be able to run you down our qualifying order as our drivers are about to take to the grid. Sean, are you looking forward to this race?
Yeah, I am. Should be good.
Well, I
Exciting
guess we'll
session.
find out a bit later. Um, let's have a look at the qualifying grid at the moment. So on pole in LMDh, we have got 42 drivers in total today, which is a pretty healthy split, to be honest. And yet leading in pole, we've got Moreno Sirica in pole. He's car number 1 and he's P number 1. Alongside him, we've got Nicholas Bowe. He is P2, so you can see there a 131.5 for Sirica, a full 0.4 of a second quicker than Bowe in second, which is a pretty big gap to have in these cars. Third place in LMDh is Dennis Wolf. Alongside him will be Johnny Verhoef. And Matteo Frigerio, the other driver to be within a second of Sirica's pole position time in a field of 18 drivers, with a lot of very familiar names and some other new names to this series as well. And speaking of familiar names, Max Kuss has put it on pole with a 137.492 in the LMP2s. Alongside him will be Thomas Mora, another familiar name, and a much closer gap. In fact, if you look down to all of the top 11, there is just 0.6 of a second separating them. So look out for a very competitive LMP2 field today. On the second row, we will have Matti Corvenmar and Gabriel Roos-Gabe, and Claudio Visparelli will be in 5th there as well. But again, just look how close everyone is there. And then, of course, just as we're about to get going, the pace lap, I believe, has started. And in GTEs, we have got Soren Kolodziej in first. He is car number 2, so you would have expected him to put that there. However, Junior Borges with just half a tenth behind. That is a good qualifying lap from him, and he'll be starting alongside there. Marco Mendes, Michael Gross on the second row with Alessandro Patiglio and Diego Battaglia, an all-Italian third row. And again, just half a second separating the top 8 in GTE. So a very competitive top split today. And we'll just have a little bit of a calm before the storm moment as these LMDHs make their wiggly way down the back straight just after Variante Ascari there. And you can see the LMP2s in the background as we let Doug, the pace driver, take us round. And we can get going very soon. Those of you 60 minutes will start as soon as the first car passes the start line. There is going to be a pit stop in all 3 classes. Expect to see the pit window around 40 minutes. So there is some strategy. No, it's not just, I know it's called a sprint, but there'll be some thinking the drivers have to do here. And as we come around the parabolica with the LMDHs, we wait now for Moreno Sirica to pull the trigger. The pace car has pulled in, and we've got the long run down to the first chicane. We'll do very well. We'll do very well indeed if nobody is going to... Oh, and Sirica's gone. Let's have a look to see if he's going to survive into turn 1. You can see the LMP2's not quite in the background yet. This is a huge LMDH field. Sirica has got his braking spot on. Somebody has been spun in the back. That's Frigerio has been spun round in the back. Sirica, though, has got through nice and cleanly. Nicholas Bowe in second. Devin Russell in third. And there is a big gap already in those front 3. It looks like we've got about 4 or 5 LMDHs in total that have been caught in incidents in the first corner based on the fact that Matti Corvenmar, leading the LMP2s, is ahead of already 2 or 3 of them, which he'll not be happy with that. The LMDHs will be just tripping over those LMP2s. However, it does look like and apologies for the technical issues we're having, believe we do have audio but not video. So good luck to those of you relying on my dulcet tones to describe what's happening. Basically, Mariano Sirica is still in the lead. He got through turn 1 correctly. We're just finishing lap 1 for the LMDHs now. Nicholas Bowe right behind by less than half a second, with Dennis Robin Wolf in third. Then it's a little bit of a mix-up as we get further back. The front three have already gapped the rest of the field. Johnny Verhoef, the big loser, he is down 14th, 10 places down from where he started in the LMDHs. And in the intervening few moments, it looks like we've had a bit of a shuffle in the LMP2 field as well, because Rene Penkett is now leading there. Claudio Vesparelli in second with Robert Biggs third. None of them were at the top end of the grid to start with. And then a slightly calmer GTE field with Colozzier still in the lead, and a nearly 2-second gap already on Marco Mendes in second, who's just been overtaken by Michael Gross as they come into the first chicane. The cameras, if we have them, which I don't believe we do yet, I think iRacing has just decided to crash on the production side of things. Good old iRacing. And Sirica is very calmly leading from Nicholas Bowe. Bowe, however, is defending his line from Dennis Robin Wolf as they come into. They are coming through into Ascari there. So Sirica will be liking the sight of that, although I'm not really sure why Bowe decided to defend there, because he's got more than half a second gap to Wolf, and he is much closer to Sirica than Wolf is to Bowe. Their gap back to Liam Lynch in fourth is about 3 seconds already, so this is very much looking like a shootout in the top 3 for LMDH, as we hopefully will be able to bring you videos soon. In the meantime, I can tell you, apart from our funky times on the first lap into the first chicane, which I think we were all expecting madness to happen there, broadly speaking, everyone's been quite sensible since then. And yeah, we can let's have a look at some of the biggest winners and losers in each of the fields. So Patrick Svalassi, who I think we can all agree has shown more pace than his position here would necessarily show. He's up 5 places to 9th in LMDH. Similarly, we've got a few drivers up 6 places in LMTB P2 as well. Robert Biggs, Velimir Angelovic and Jonathan Clement have all made up 6 places in LMP2. And then GTE again, it's been a bit better behaved. Thiago Pereira is the main person to have made up places. He's up 3 from 8th to 5th. So I believe we're all back and you now have audio and video, which is lovely for everyone involved, quite frankly. So now we can get on with the racing, and no one had to see the typical Monza lap 1 shenanigans, and now we can watch some proper racing amongst the remaining surviving drivers. I believe we have only lost the 3 drivers. Junior Borges from GTE, who I don't believe took to the field. Max Kuss from LMP2, who clearly was the one most badly affected from that field in lap 1. He is now going after having had to tow to the pit lane, I believe. And Maximilian Bui, who is driving in the LMDH. I don't believe he's going. I think he has quit out. But supposedly everyone else is still running, although Luca Morelli in LMDH is still to get past Rene Peckett at the front of LMP2. And you can see on the timing tower on the left, you can see the positions gained or lost for each of the drivers to the right of their name. And we're now with Matthias Kaiser, as the LMDH field in the mid-pack is getting very congested indeed. A little bit of smoke ahead of Kaiser there, but it doesn't appear to be a driver off the track. It's probably just someone putting the power down a little bit too early, over-enthusiastic, trying to get the pace down, because Monza is all about the exit. It's all about getting the power down to make the biggest advantage you can out of these long straights. And I think the other thing to look out for any viewer today is any drivers trying to save fuel, trying to save tyres, just to see if you can make that jump in the pit stops, because really, if you're, say, Bruno Mello, Paulo Lopez, who are the 2 drivers ahead of Kaiser here, you're sort of stuck in a no man's land. If you can get past the next driver, all you're going to do really is cost yourself a bit of time if you're all running at the same pace. And they're only 14 seconds off the lead, so it's not as though that gap is completely unsalvageable at the moment. And yeah, we'll just have to see how this race unfolds. I think at this stage we've lost all of the overzealous drivers, and we're now seeing all of the sensible drivers who are just going to bide their time. This is an hour-long race after all, and there's plenty of time. The other thing to look out for, of course, is going to be traffic. And yeah, so Sean, I believe you've probably had quite a hectic first few minutes, so you've probably not been able to catch too much of what's happened in the race. But how important do you think the strategy is going to be later on in this race?
I think it's going to be classic Monza strategy, to be honest, Chris. We're going to see people run as long as they can, get those tanks as dry as they can, and see if they can gap people with the extra lap.
Yeah, I think that's the most sensible thing to do here. I do wonder, because I didn't do this in the one time I've actually raced rather than commentating. Actually, we'll bring this anecdote a bit later, because Matthias Kaiser's looking a bit racy behind Paulo Lopez here. Is he going to make a move into the second chicane? He is not. I've gone on about it in the past in these broadcasts, the importance of body language with your car, and Kaiser there, while he did dip his tyres out of the racing line halfway round the curve between the first and second chicane, by tucking in nice and early, he's just indicating to Paulo Lopez, I'm not going for anything here, don't defend. And in theory, it saves both of you a bit of time here, although Kaiser has ended up putting himself under a bit of pressure with Mark Zoidhoff behind and Johnny Verhoef behind him. And Verhoef, who is the third best driver on iRacing in this field, 2 places behind the Kaiser who we're with here in the Bean car, you would expect him to be quite racy here. So if you're a driver in front of him, there's an element of, as you can see, I think that's Kevin Shylon in the background, really hammering it over the exit curbs. So that's a driver pushing to make up some places back there. But Kaiser, I think, if you're him, you're going to not necessarily want to make that move because it's going to cost you more time than you gain. You may as well just try and save as much fuel and, let's be honest, a bit of mental energy as well for later on in this race. And we'll have to see where we go. He's actually one of the few drivers in LMDh to have not gained or lost any positions whatsoever. But we can go back to the anecdote I was so desperate to tell, and that was me not deciding to pit early in the LMP2 field around Spa last week in a race I decided to do. Because if you look on the track map there, I'm absolutely convinced for these LMP2s that there would be some advantage in pitting so that you exit just as the GTEs catch you, and then by the time you catch them back up, they'll have pitted and you avoid having to lap them at all. That is perhaps best done by someone with a spotter though, or someone who's very good at paying attention to 2 things at once. Because if you get that wrong, all you're going to do is end up taking yourself massively off the prime strategy and potentially leaving yourself vulnerable to a huge overcut. It's often been the best thing to do is to just copy the drivers around you. So we'll have to see in probably about 30 minutes of driving just exactly what all of these drivers do. But again, as you can see from that track map, the lead LMDHs are about to catch the back of the that's the GTE field. Actually, yes, no, it is. And well, actually, no, they're catching the GTEs now. Sorry, it's drivers out of position. They're throwing me, but that's drivers recovering from earlier incidents. So we can go on to Moreno Sirica now, who's catching up to the back of that GTE field. Now, we've said before in the past, in these 3-class series, it's generally speaking a lot easier for the first and third classes to deal with each other because there's going to be such a pace differential. As you see, our leader here, Sirica, coming past Plasto and Sharp with absolutely no issues whatsoever. And Monza's really not the kind of circuit where you're going to see drivers go too wide into any of the corners, with perhaps the exception of Lesmo, although I would be avoiding it if I were these drivers, but I'm not these drivers. I'm the commentator, Sirica. Gladly past Matt Acton there, and he's already halfway through the GTE field, and it's been very simple for him so far. Sean, I don't know if you'd like to talk a little bit about overtaking strategies for the LMP2s with the GTEs. I know as a Ford driver in a GTE, you've probably been on the receiving end of some suspicious driving, shall we call it?
Yeah, this one, from a GTE point of view, just got to keep an eye on the mirror, see where the cars are coming up. The relative is so
maybe
important.
We can hear from Sean a little bit later. And you
Sorry,
can see,
Chris.
I
am here.
No worries.
As I was saying, as from a GTE point of view, you've really got to keep an eye on that relative, see how far back these cars are, the LMP2 and the LMDh. As they come off the last corner here, like you see, you have to know that distance and how quick they're going to close you down to, say, the first chicane here. Because then you can concentrate on actually running your race or knowing that they're going to come up. The thing here with the new hypercars is that they're not as quick as the LMP1s, so they're actually more more like the LMP2s when they come past you, where you really have to wait for them to come out, exit out of the corners. Whereas a GTE, you're going to have a lot more traction than both these faster classes. It's all about managing your exit of those corners as you come out behind these prototypes.
Very much the case. You can see there, we actually saw on the previous corner, David Jimenez, who is in 5th in LMDh. He really got caught out by the fact he couldn't get past one of these GTEs before we got into the corner. And the GT, very rightfully, you know, the way iRacing is set up, again, for those of you watching who may not know, is that all three classes are sort of, they're equal. Like, just because the GTEs are a few laps down, they don't have to completely give up track position, as we're seeing there with Dan Bull getting caught behind a couple of GTEs there behind Patrick Svalassi. And the GTEs are perfectly entitled to take their line so long as they don't start blocking. And, you know, they're in their own race. You can see those two GTEs, they are in their own fight. And I don't know for sure, but there may have been a change of position there. But yeah, it's mostly, this is one of those circuits where I think the fact that the straight line speed, as you can see there, is going to be Marco Mendes, probably got the best view in the house for that, and may well be able to take advantage of the fact that Michael Gross was slightly disadvantaged by an LMDh there. He doesn't seem to have the straight line advantage, and this was brought up between Sean and myself before we started. It's predominantly a Ferrari field in the GTEs today. We've got a couple of Porsches, but funnily enough, none of them are in the top 7 at the moment. That might be part of the same reason why everyone's in a Ferrari. It's just that extra top line speed advantage. And if I remember being told this correctly, I believe the Ferraris could take a bit more of the curb and stay stable compared to some of the other cars, which certainly around the second chicane in particular is quite the advantage to have. So we'll have to see if that is going to be the case later on. No Chevrolets, no Fords, no. It's just a real shame, and no BMWs, although I don't think we were expecting to see any BMWs in the GTE field today. But at the moment, yep, all of the top 7 in GTE are in the Ford, and Michael Gross in the top 3 is the only person to have gained positions. He is up 2 from 4th. And we can go now and have a look at Matti Korvenmar, who at one point I think was leading the LMP2 field on lap 1. He is now back down to 4th. And he's just managed to get himself past Robert Briggs, I believe, or is that Kieran Smart getting past Korvenmar? This is probably as we're coming through the first chicane here, this is the prime overtaking spot for all of these cars, both within class and probably lapping other classes as well. You want to get that move done before you're in the braking zone if you're lapping someone. And Patrick Svalassi, who we've seen, he's been involved in a lot of the action in the first 2 races, and so far again, more of the same. He's got Bruno Mello just in front of him. Number 7 Ferrari there of Michael Gross, giving enough space for Svalassi to stay down the inside. But again, just look how much of a distance they have made over Gross just in the exit of that corner and the start of the straight. Really, really shows you just how much extra downforce these LMDHs produce compared to the GTEs. But again, Svalassi, I would say, probably has the measure of Bruno Mello, but he's not opted to make that move just yet. And I think that's just another driver perhaps biding their time. I mean, we saw last week Svalassi was running very well until an incident took him right out of the running there, and that's a very polite GTE. I believe that's probably our leader. That's probably Kolodsiej. Just getting well out of the way, because of course he's leading his class. He doesn't want to get involved in any silly incidents, and he has managed to gap Gross in terms of the draft. Obviously a 4-second lead is nothing to write home about a quarter of the way into this race, but by getting himself out of Gross's, or rather getting himself out of the draft range of Gross, what that's going to allow is it just gives Kolodsiej a little bit more of leeway with his strategy. He doesn't have to worry about the fuel saving behind him. He knows that Gross is using the same amount of fuel. And I wonder if we'll see, we're not going to see it here because they're just going to come into the braking zone at the same time, but you'll often see these GTEs tuck back in as quick as they can to try and eke as much of the draft out of the faster classes as they come through. We may well get to see an example of it here, and yeah, you can see him pretty sharpish getting into that slipstream of the LMDh, although not able to make use of it for very long just because of the sheer difference in speed. In fact, it may be worth having a look at the fastest laps for all 3 of our classes so far. So the fastest LMDHs have just dipped into the 132s. In fact, the only person that has is Moreno Sirica, who is currently, I believe, about 3 seconds clear of Nicholas Bowe. And they are themselves about 4 or 5 seconds quicker than the fastest LMDHs or LMP2, sorry, who are doing 1:38.6s. That would be Vesparelli in second, who's got the fastest lap there. And then if we go back to the GTEs, they're lapping in the 1:44s and 1:45s. In fact, Kolosiej's fastest lap is about 0.7 of a second quicker than the next fastest GTE. So that showing some early dominance there. And again, he's looking very in control of that Ferrari 488 as he's just getting a bit more of the LMDH field coming through. And then he'll have a lot of respite because, as you can see, the LMP2s are still quite a few laps away from catching the GTE field. But unfortunately for the GTEs, it is going to be a pretty much constant thing to deal with in this race, is just having to view in the rearview mirror as other cars come through. But as with Kolosiej gapping Gross has managed to gap Mendes. In fact, the GTE field has really spread out. We've only really got Pereira and Patiglio 4th and 5th. And then Sharp and Plasto in 9th and 10th, the only drivers within a second of each other. So you will probably find in all three fields these clumps will form. Draft trains is basically what they are, where one driver's not been able to catch up with someone and you end up with the other drivers behind just sort of biding their time. But of course the trouble with doing that will then be, if you have got the pace advantage on the car in front but you're not willing to overtake, you're going to end up losing touch with the drivers in front, which perhaps is something happening to, say, for example, Dennis Wolf in 3rd in LMDH, or rather, sorry, Liam McNinch in 4th, who is stuck. I say stuck behind Dennis Wolf. He seems pretty calm behind him, and I don't think iRacing necessarily means everything. But this is car 5 versus car 30. In theory, Liam McNinch is the superior driver. Of course, we don't know what car he's made that in. So you see just how close he's now getting. He is now going for the move as we come down to Ascari. This is not one of the heavier braking zones, and it's perhaps one of the less scary turns to go too wide into, but it does seem like McNinch has got that move done and dusted. The interesting thing now will be to see how is his exit into Parabolica going to be. And is Wolf going to be able to just get the comeback into turn 1, because he's going to have the longest straight on the circuit to do that in, and it's not as though Wolf has managed to clear a gap there. However, the other thing Wolf's got to worry about is that David Jimenez is not that far behind, and you don't really want to get him involved in your battle. And the other thing to have to worry about, that car number 15 there, that's a few laps down. That's Max Kusa. In fact, he's 2 laps down. And the blue flags probably do apply to him a bit more because he's really not racing for position. Liam McNinch is going to want him to get out of the way as soon as possible. And as you can see, it's really beginning to heat up outside of the top 2 positions in LMDH at the moment. In fact, Liam McNinch defending a bit there getting past Max Kusa, the lapped car. And I think because Wolf has had to do that just before the braking zone, that's a hefty bit of curb for McNinch there. Yeah, Wolf only just able to get back into the braking zone just in time, so I suspect that's probably cost him a 10th or 2. But we probably won't see that cause too much of an upset in terms of Wolf losing the draft. Now, Sean, I know you probably know this yourself as well. Just explain a little bit, if you can, about the boost system in these LMDHs. Will these drivers be using it strategically like they do in, say, the Mercedes F1 car, or is it more a case of balanced is best?
How they are in iRacing is not how I think they're going to be used next season, particularly when we see them in IMSA Daytona as well, which is, 3 weeks away. Drivers are going to be keeping on balanced pretty much the entire race. If they're able to charge and attack out of the pits, they might do that on their outlap, but I can't see that happening here. And then other than that, if there's anything left in the battery, the last 2 laps, they'll burn it all through to the end. But it is very much a kind of zero strategy event here with the electric power.
Which is, I think, a shame in a sense, because I've certainly been in F1 races on iRacing where it's half the fun is sort of working out how much battery power you've got compared to the other drivers. So, of course, the trouble would be here, if you'd burned all your battery getting past someone, they can just do the same to get past you, and you've just cost yourself time from the other driver. But McNinch seems to be holding off Dennis Wolf for the moment, but they are within half a second of each other. But at the moment, we can follow this 4-car battle here. We're with Paulo Lopez, who started in 10th and is now down in 14th. But the 2 drivers behind him lost out far more from the lap 1 incidents that unfortunately we weren't able to show you. But that is Johnny Verhoff and Luca Morelli in 15th and 16th, just behind. And if anything, I think Lopez is getting dropped by Kaiser a little bit, and he's going to have to start worrying about Verhoeven and Morelli, who, well, I think the trouble for those two as well is they're sort of keeping each other honest as well. And it could well be, they don't look too damaged to me, but if they've had offs on lap 1, they could well be down on a little bit of straight line speed. In fact, our timing software in the background can tell us what their top speeds are, and Verhoff's top speed 305 kilometers an hour, Morelli behind him 301, but that is both slower than all of the 3 cars ahead of them by quite a few kilometers. I mean, Mark Zoidhoff in 12th has managed to get up to 312 kilometers an hour somewhere. So they're definitely a little bit down on top speed, especially considering they'll have had access to the draft this entire time. And it probably means that they're stuck here. They're just going to have to fuel save a bit and maybe see what they can do in the pit stops. But really, it's just a case of build on what you can, learn about the circuit. Although not that these drivers need necessarily learn too much about what's going on. As you see, Rene Paquet letting Kevin Shylon past, as they are not in the same class. Shylon has pitted early. They are now in the pit window to make it to the end of the race. So obviously Shylon, I presume, felt he must have had damage, although he did qualify at the back of the grid, so he's perhaps down on pace as well anyway. And let's have a look at what happened to Jonathan Clement here. He has, I believe, just retired, as we see a slow-mo of him coming down one of our straights into, I believe, the second chicane, and overzealous on the brakes. It's actually a bit surprising to see that from an LMP2, and that car number 6, which is Gabriel Gabe, who is now 10th in LMP2, not able to react in time, and he'll probably have picked up some damage and lost some top end speed there. Jonathan Clement is not running anymore. I believe he may well, yeah, he has disconnected. His race is done. And I'll be honest, I was expecting to see some of those heavy braking, snap oversteer in the rear moments from the LMDHs. It's not something I really associate with the LMP2s quite so much, as Dan Bull has now pulled into the pits. I wonder if that's again an early try and repair some damage from lap 1 incidents or similar, or if it's just try an alternative strategy. I mean, we were talking earlier about finding some clear air. If you look on that track map, he is going to come out into the loveliest bit of clear air, to the point that if I'm in an LMP2 right now, in the sort of chaos zone in the middle, as it were, I'd be looking to get out of this as soon as possible, as we've now got this battle for P12 is beginning to heat up a bit. These 3 cars are the closest together they have been for a while. And you can tell the cars around are pushing it. I mean, firstly, you can see all the tyre marks in the gravel trap on the exit of the second chicane. Secondly, you can see those puffs of dust coming up every now and then where drivers are just pushing the absolute limits of the track. And there is a car there facing the wrong direction. I think that's Matthias Kaiser, or was it Bruno Mello? It was Bruno Mello, and I think we'll be able to see a replay of why he is facing the wrong way there. So we go too wide into the second Lesmo. And a bit of netcode contact there. That's very unfortunate for Mello. Not a huge amount he could have done there. Although somebody perhaps needs to have realised that going too wide into the second Lesmo is just a bad idea 25 minutes into a race, because of the amount of time you're going to lose coming down the straight into Ascari. But we live and learn, as we're now with Robert Briggs defending from the number... I say defending from number 5. That is Liam McNinch in LMDH. And Biggs rightfully sort of saying, nope, this corner is mine. McNinch having to wait. That's going to bring Dennis Wolf back into the equation, because that gap had increased ever so slightly. And I think that's going to be the story of the next few laps, really, is these LMDH and LMP2s being so close in top speed. I mean, there's only about 10 kilometers an hour between their top speeds, and that's really not enough if you're catching up to someone in the braking zone. And Zoidhoff, I must say, without wishing to patronise him too much, because he's still nearly a 5k driver, he's doing a good job of keeping Verhoeven and Morelli behind him here, and Again, a bit more smoke we can see in the foreground. Is that someone pushing too hard or has someone gone off? I think it's someone pushing too hard. Could well be Patrick Svalassi, who is just a few seconds up the road, trying to catch up with Scanfurla in 8th. And Corvena, number 34, another LMP2, victim of the second chicane as they come into the braking zone. A little bit luckier than our previous incident we saw there, because Corvenmar has managed to be facing the right direction as he comes through, and we are reaching the stage of the race where all three classes are now occupying the same sections of track. And I must say, so far, Sean, I've been impressed. We've not seen any sort of inter-class accidents, although I'm touching my wooden desk because I do not want to jinx it.
Oh, I think it's too late now. Chris. I love this part of the race, and it's scary as the GTE driver. But when you've got all these classes coming together and trying to find their way through the track, it's amazing that there aren't more accidents. No matter what the level in iRacing, it's actually pretty clean, this series, when it comes to this sort of multi-class racing.
Yeah, I must say I'm quite glad that none of the surveys that the community, the forum, have put forward. I would have been quite sad to see this become a B licence series, because I mean, these are the most advanced, in theory, cars on the service to be driving, and you really want drivers who've proven they can, if not drive safely, at least know how to farm safety rating, which is in some senses the same thing, I guess. So it's nice that beyond the sort of standard internet racing issues we occasionally see, that this is, like you say, a pretty sensibly driven series. Although, again, I don't wish the commentators curse anyone, because I mean, last week we said someone was doing very well and they immediately made a mistake. So we can't praise the drivers too much, or silly things will happen, because they can telepathically hear what we're saying in real time. And again, I like the amount of dust being thrown up by these drivers, pushing as hard as they can, using as much of the circuit as they can. And I just love shots like this, where you can see all of these cars coming down this straight into Parabolica. This is exactly what multi-class racing is all about. It's this intermingling of all three classes. And we've all said it in these broadcast splits before. It's not necessarily your raw one-lap pace that determines who the best drivers in this series are. It's how well can you negotiate traffic while still driving really quickly. And I think it's fair to say that Moreno Sirica and Nicholas Bowe in LMDh are doing a very good job of that at the moment, because they have pulled out a 12-second gap over Liam McNinch, who, I must say, along with some of the gang we've got here with Matteo Frigerio, who we're currently looking at, they're getting a far more caught up in these things. And Dennis Wolff is sort of centre of all the battles now, as Frigerio pulls out but is not alongside just yet. And again, another driver who's decided to tuck in. I think Dennis Robin Wolff rather, seems very, very confident under braking into that second chicane, because look how close up to David Jimenez he is now, caught back up as they are all three of them going to clear this GT before Lesmo 2R. But Frigerio very sensibly opting not to go too wide into Lesmo. We don't want to see a repeat of what happened earlier there. And of course that is going to cost him a little bit, but he is still within the draft range, so it's not cost him too much. Sometimes that lower risk approach to traffic is for the best, but of course the flip side there is Rick Chivon in 7th behind him is now within the draft range as well. So we've got a 4-car train developing here, with Liam McNinch actually managing to have pulled himself out of it ever so slightly. He's 2 seconds clear of David Jimenez, so he's had a very good race so far. He started in P8, so to get onto the podium at the halfway mark exactly is a very good job indeed. And we have had a few pitters, in particular in the LMDh class. So Shailon on lap 13 pitted, but then since then Dan Ball on lap 15, Paulo Lopez lap 16 and Svalassi on lap 18 have all pitted, although of the 4 of them, I suspect Dan Ball is the only one that didn't have much damage, because his stop was 18 seconds. All 3 of the other drivers were stopped for well over 20. But that is, again, that's a reason to take the early stop, because it just means you're getting rid of that damage. It means you can lap a little bit quicker now, and who knows, maybe there'll be a few more issues later in the race. Although of those drivers, compared to Frigerio's lap time, only Svalassi is lapping quicker at the moment, I believe, unless I'm reading that the wrong way around, in which case Frigerio needs to get his act together. But this train here, it's, again, we've seen very sensible driving in these trains. No one's really going to fight too hard, he says, as I think we've got an attempted too wide, slightly further up the field. It's not happened, in fact. So that is, oh, actually, sorry, that is traffic. That's the number 22 of Claudio Visparelli being overtaken. So he is our leader of the LMP2 field. He'll be hoping that all of these cars can clear him as soon as possible. And you can see the number 23 in the background of Kieran Smart. That is P2 in LMP2. And that is a relatively healthy gap to have at this stage of the race, although there is still obviously plenty of racing to be had, including a pit stop for all of these drivers. And we can now go on board with Visparelli, so we'll see, you can still see the difference in speed there. So once we're up to top speed, and that's Giovon in front, it's fine there, but of course, if you're approaching the braking zone, look how much Visparelli closes up in the braking zone. Now, of course, a lot of that is just a concertina effect of any car in the braking zone, but really that is just a case of these cars under braking are broadly performing the same in terms of their stopping power, which is why we don't want to see too many LMDHs making that move in braking zones, because it's only going to slow the both of them up. But this has been a very, very solid job by Visparelli, who qualified in 5th. Although I believe all of our leaders have been crashed out. Max Kuss, of course, who started on pole, is still driving around, but he's a lap down after having pit on the first lap. Thomas Mora, who qualified 2nd as well, he has not pitted, but he's dropped 6 places down and is 26 seconds behind Visparelli. So just goes to show qualifying isn't necessarily everything at somewhere like Monza. If you're good at staying out of trouble on lap 1 and then good at building that gap and not wasting too much fuel, you can really make a good run of it. But then we compare that to GTE, which is clearly better behaved, because there's been very little movement in GTE, with Cloutier and Mendes in 1st and 3rd, having started 1st and 3rd. Gross started 4th, is now in P2. And it's the replay of Kieran Sharp. You can see that car really squirming under braking, and Kieran Sharp just pushing that car a little bit too hard, losing it under braking. Our first victim under braking into turn 1 that we have seen. He is still 4 places up in his starting position. He's now in 6th in GTE, but he's now having a very lonely race with over 15 seconds, both in front and behind of him, to the next drivers. So I think that'll just be a bit of a consolidation race for him now, as we can go over to Angel Guevara. We've seen him in previous weeks in the LMP2. Seemingly pretty solid driver. We've not, well, in the sense that I don't believe we've seen an instance involving him yet, although again, I really hope I'm not cursing him here. Again, I think a lot of these fields have just begun to spread out a little bit. Guevara, he's got 3 seconds ahead of him to Anjelovic, who is in 3rd, and then Robert Biggs is a 2.5 behind him, with a few GTEs left to get past. So they're probably just going to have to see if they can stay within each other's, or rather, I think Biggs will have to hope he can get within Guevara's draft range, and Guevara will be hoping he can keep Biggs out of it, just because the sheer difference that will make come pit stop time if they do. But this 3-way battle here, although really 2-way with Jimenez just providing a tow, this is our closest battle on the field at the moment, and it has remained so for a few laps now. Dennis Wolf, who at one point was up into 3rd, has been slowly but steadily dropping a bit further back, and you can see him there really using the toe of the GT for as long as he can. But this is about as close as Frigerio has been. Is he going to make a move into turn 1? Are we going to see a late dive out on the braking zone? We are not. In fact, you can see the amount he drops back as he fuel saves there. So that is, of course, the advantage of not making that move. But at a certain point, is Frigerio going to think, hang on a second, this guy's holding me up, and McNinch has managed to get away. David Jimenez is starting to be able to pull away as well, it looks like. As we now approach a GTE, is this going to affect them into the corner? Oh, and there is contact there, and that's the number 11, David Jimenez, bullying the GTE off the field. That is probably why we get some grumpy GTEs in both the forum and the community Discord, which of course you can find in the link in YouTube if you would like to join us. Dennis Wolf, I think after that contact with Jimenez, is now right on his tail. Frigerio, I think, got caught out by it and has now got Giovon for company behind him. But again, are we going to see any moves at this stage into the race? Because these cars will be very light now as they're running out of fuel and approaching the pit window. We're probably only 2 or 3 laps away from most of these cars diving into the pit lane. And let's take a break by having a look at a different battle on the field. In fact, this one, no, Morelli has got himself on the driving line, but Zoidhoff is defending that, but not defending it so sort of aggressively that he's remaining off the braking line as we come into the corner. This is, I think, certainly the first three quarters of this race was always going to be more tactical than perhaps some of the other races. But just to reiterate how light these cars are getting, Nicholas Bowe in second in LMDh has just set his fastest lap of the race. In fact, he was a full second quicker on the last lap than Moreno Sirica in the lead. So do keep a lookout for them as Kieran Smart pulls into the pits from second in LMP2, along with Andjelovic and Guevara. So the LMP2 pit window very firmly open, and Visparelli's managed to get himself an extra lap on the rest of the field. It'll be interesting to see if that gives him an advantage once the pit stops have finished, as we see Dennis Wolf has got past Jimenez into the braking zone of the second chicane. So Robin Wolf, as soon as I criticised him for dropping down the field, has made back pretty much all of the places that he has lost. But he's got a big train of LMDHs behind him, with Jimenez, Frigerio and Schiavon all behind him. And then a big 10-second gap back to Lorenzo Scanfurla in 8th. But will any of these cars be coming in this lap? Is anyone now going to... Oh, as we see a bit of twitching into the braking zone. The race is beginning to pick up a bit here, with Jimenez and Frigerio being very twitchy as we approached the braking zone for the Ascari chicane.
Top two have now gone into the pits, Chris, so this could be the last lap. Last time out, we saw most of the cars pitting at the same time, so it could be the same this week.
Yeah, let's keep an eye on what Robin Wolf does, as it looks like Jimenez and Frigerio right behind the... Yeah, we're not going to see everyone coming in. Frigerio is staying out, but everyone else has come out, and McNinch has stayed out as well. So it'll be interesting to see what's going to be the better strategy here. Will it be the undercut? Will it be the overcut? So just to compare, we said earlier that Dan Bull, he is the quickest stop time so far at 18 seconds. Sirica from the lead has just done a 19-second stop, and Bowe is still stationary. So that was a 23-second stop for Nicholas Bowe. I wonder how much of that was damage. But he'll be frustrated with that, because he had managed to cut that gap to 2 seconds, and it will have just completely been wiped out now. And I think without mistakes running into it, the driver of Sirica's quality is going to take a lot of work to bridge a now 6-second gap. I think it will have been after the pit stops come out. We are with Svelasi, who will be the next driver to come in if they're coming on the same lap that all bar 4 drivers have done so far.
He's actually
sorry, no, he won't be, because
Chris.
he pitted on lap 18. He pitted 6 laps ago. So is he going to have made any places up here? He's getting a nice juicy tow off the 23 of Kieran Smart, who pitted last lap on the LMP2s. You see some of the LMDHs coming out of the pit there. That's Matthias Kaiser and Johnny Verhoef, and they've managed to get out. But of course, Velasi's going to be a little bit more comfortable in that car, because he's had a few laps to get used to the extra weight of the new fuel. Kaiser and Verhoef won't have the same thing. Liam McNinch has come in from the provisional lead of LMDH as well. Is Frigerio going to follow him? Is Zoidhoff going to follow him? As Sirica is alongside him here, actually. So this could well be... I think Zoidhoff's actually been quite generous there in letting Sirica get past.
He's
but of course,
in the pits now, isn't he?
Yeah, you don't really want the leader of the race, once the pit stop's finished, to be right behind you as you're trying to come into the pit stop, because what if he'd taken the inside of the Parabolica? That would have been a very frustrating loss of time. But it'll be interesting to see, as McNinch has finished his stop, he's managed to sub-18 stop, as has Frigerio. The only 2 LMDHs to go sub-18, so that extra lap of burning fuel, meaning less fuel to come out. McNinch is coming out, and you can see coming past him there is a GTE. We don't need to worry about that. I think McNinch was pretty safely in P3. Jimenez has got past Frigerio, but I think Frigerio has managed to stay ahead of Wolf. And the train is sort of... So Wolf was the big loser there. His stop was 3 seconds slower. He was stationary for 20 seconds. So he went into those pit stops in 4th and has come out in 6th. David Jimenez, the big winner, because he is up to 4th now. And I think McNinch as well, probably, despite him stopping a bit quicker than... Well, certainly a whole second quicker than David Jimenez, McNinch is only 2 seconds up the road. So I think David Jimenez will be thinking, well, hang on, in the last 20 minutes, I reckon I can catch up with that gap. And while we've been following this, I believe most of the GTEs have come in, although we are still waiting for our lead trio to come in. And again, it always seems to be it's the fastest drivers seem to be able to last the longest. And we can get a replay here of Matthias Kaiser as we come into the first chicane. What's happened to Kaiser here? And there we go. There's that snap oversteer on braking that we've seen in the LMDH. And he has done a fantastic job of not hitting that wall there. So he won't have any damage to the car. And, oh, Kaiser is a man after my own heart because he has taken the bollards the proper way rather than just piling his way through them. Now, I don't know if you knew this, Sean, but the slowdown that iRacing gives you, at least in every car I've tested it in, if you take that chicane properly, it pretty much wipes out the slowdown for you. I don't know if you were aware of that, but it made me feel like a proper racing driver the first time I found that out.
Yes and no. Last time I did it, I still had 3 seconds to make up. I must have really got into the off-track situation quite quickly. So I think it depends how slow you do it.
Well, maybe you're just much better at taking chicanes than I am. that's what I read into with that one. But yeah, David Jimenez has actually pulled out a 1.5 second gap over Matteo Frigerio, I believe, here. And Rick Schiavon now, he is at the tail end of this 3-car battle with Dennis Wolf and Matteo Frigerio ahead of him. This is the stage of the race where you're going to begin to expect to see drivers get a bit racier because this is where track position is going to matter a little bit more. You're not going to necessarily want to fuel save here. Although having said that, I'm sure we've all had races where drivers have not got their fuel calculations quite right and you just see them spluttering to a stop on the last lap. In fact, has something happened to Frigerio? Because did he maybe have a slowdown or has he picked up some damage somewhere? Because he has just let Schiavon through and really isn't looking particularly racy here. I do wonder if something has happened there. I didn't notice him go off track to need to pick up a slowdown, but I can't really think why else that would have happened. As he's now with the double whammy, he's going to get caught behind that GTE, so he's going to drop off the draft of Schiavon and Wolf as well. So we'll have to keep an eye on that, see what's happened there. But while we do, Morelli and Zoidhoff are now within 1/4 of a second of each other. Let's see how good of a job can Morelli do in getting a good exit round the Parabolica. And are we going to see him make a move into turn 1? He's now within less than 0.2 of a second. They've got a Ferrari just ahead of them in the GTEs to keep things really interesting. Do you really want to be making a move as you're overtaking the slowest class car on the field? There's not going to be the space to do it here. I think Morelli just sensibly holding back a bit. But will we see a move into the second chicane? That gap is now 0.4 of a second. How much is that gap going to close as we get into the next chicane? And let's not forget, of course, Johnny Verhoef just behind by a second. If these guys battle a bit too hard, Verhoef is going to be able to close that gap. Morelli not close enough this time around, but we've got an LMP2 fight just further back on the field with Guevara and Jelavic. Again, Guevara not quite close enough into the first chicane, but close enough that it probably has slightly compromised him coming out of the chicane. And it just looks like he's not going to be able to get close enough into the second chicane either. But meanwhile, Morelli and Zoidhoff are now again within 0.2 of a second of each other. I must actually, it looks like Zoidhoff's beginning to defend his line a little bit. Again, we'll probably see more of that into this last quarter of the race. Cannot believe 45 minutes have passed already, especially considering we haven't exactly seen a ton of overtakes in this race. Plenty of wheel-to-wheel action though. And Zoidhoff, again, he's about as close as he was last lap. If anything, he's maybe 0.5 tenth behind. But is that extra bit of space going to give him more room to get a better exit out of the Parabolica? Maybe a better slingshot. No GTE to worry about this time around. Would this perhaps be the time to make a move? He's closing, but not by a huge amount. He's only just closed into 1/10 of a second now. And he has just lifted and let Zoidhoff take the corner. And if we compare their last laps, Verhoef behind is matching the two drivers in front. So far, with probably about 10 laps to go, maybe a bit less than that, they're not really looking too racy, although Zoidhoff is beginning to defend that line a little bit. But Morelli has yet to really make that move. And we can go back to the other battle because this time Guevara is much closer. And Jelavic, he's got alongside, he's got along the inside. Is he going to get that car stopped in time? He's got ahead. but at what cost on the exit? Is Andjelovic going to be able to get back on him? They don't have any LMP2s to worry about behind, but they do have an LMDh to come past. Is that going to prevent Andjelovic from getting back alongside Guevara? Because he is about as close as Guevara as he dips his tyres onto the grass, and he's looking very twitchy in that number 39 car. As there's a lock-up from the LMDh ahead, another thing for these drivers to have to think about, and they will already be pretty mentally exhausted after 47 minutes of driving. But I don't think any of these battles are quite over just yet, because I don't think any drivers will be able to break the toe at this stage. Do you have any particular favourites in, say, in this Zoidhoff-Morelli-Verhoff battle, Sean? Who do you see coming out on top at this stage?
These guys are looking pretty even. It's hard to call this one. I do think that Verhoff's going to be catching them, though. They're clearly slowing each other down, these two. So we could end up with a 3-car train very soon.
Yeah, it's difficult at this stage, because I don't think Zoidhoff and Morelli are going to want to cooperate too much, because you don't want to lose track position. But if they're too uncooperative, it is, as you say, it's going to bring car number 3 right into this battle. Although this GTE might have arrived at the perfect time to just slow up Verhoff a bit. That was very trusting, I must say, of Luca Morelli, that he was expecting that Ferrari to get the car stopped without going into the back of him. Not really giving him much time to react, but this is how hard these guys are racing, and this is how high quality it is, as this time Andjelovic has got the inside with Guevara, but Guevara manages to stay alongside, but by just taking too much curb there, Andjelovic has both got the move done, and he's managed to build a bit enough of a gap that he's probably safe for another lap or two. But with 12 minutes of this race yet to go, this is far from done and dusted. So let's not assume that Andjelovic has got that third step of the podium done and dusted just yet. The two battles we've been flicking between, the only two real battles on the track, of course. Let's not forget that Schiavon and Frigerio are both within about a second of each other. Frigerio, I guess, doesn't have any damage issues if he's managed to stay within a second. However, they are 3, nearly 4 seconds behind Wolf and Jimenez. In fact, Schiavon's getting past Scanfella, so... No, sorry, that's the timing screen messing with me there. But it's Frigerio and Schiavon. Frigerio has just got back past Schiavon, so clearly no damage to that car if he's able to get the move done. Let's see, is he able to make it stick? Because I've often wondered, is it almost worth, if there's no one else you're going to be likely be fighting with, is it worth holding up until the last lap just so that you don't give the other driver an opportunity to come back past you? Because it's what we've seen with Angel Guevara and Velimir and Andjelovic in the LMP2s, is they're just trading places, and they're very close again as we come into turn 1, but they also have a GTE for company, but they may well not catch it. But Guevara's managed to get the inside line. He's managed to get ahead. Is he going to manage to get the car stopped? It seems like he has, and it looks like his exit's going to be okay, and it hopefully, for their sakes, looks like they'll get past this GTE on the straight. But they will have to take the long way round. Andjelovic using that draft for as long as possible. Is he going to stay on the inside of the braking zone? No, he's going to go to the outside, and Guevara's looking to defend it. He's just slightly squeezed his way into the braking zone on the entry. It's compromised him on the exit, though, because Andjelovic has got very close as we come into the first Lesmo. Not a place to be making a move, but he could well line something up coming out of the second Lesmo. How well can he control that car, taking a lot of curb on the entry, using as much of the rumble strip as he dares on the exit, and he is just 0.2 of a second behind the American here, but not close enough to make a move into the relatively light braking zone of the Ascari chicane. I suspect we won't see a move into the Parabolica chicane either, because again it's a relatively light braking zone by comparison, and that gap is now up to half a second, just as that space through the chicanes catches them out a bit. And we can go back to Zoidhoff and Morelli. Zoidhoff currently holding the advantage, but he is ahead as we come through the second chicane. Again, look how close those two cars are getting as we come into the Lesmos. And the amount of downforce these LMDHs have, that it wouldn't surprise me if we do see some last-minute lunges or last-minute two-wides through the Lesmos, because if any car in this race can do it, it is this LMDH from the BMW teams. And look, you can see now Zoidhoff is defending that line. He's not allowing Morelli to get alongside him. He's just placing the car really awkwardly in the middle of the track. That's very good defensive driving as we come into the last 10 minutes of the race. But with Morelli just a quarter of a second behind Zoidhoff here, is he going to be able to defend as we come through Parabolica and then go into the main straight as Schiavon has managed to get back past Frigeria? They're just a bit up the road. They'll have come through the first chicane now. Let's see if Zoidhoff and Morelli go alongside each other. As Zoidhoff's getting about as close to Morelli as she could. Morelli pulls alongside. He has got that car alongside. He brakes a little bit later. Nose. Oh, and Stapp oversteer. I was just about to say we didn't have any. He's done very well to keep that car on the track, but Zoidhoff, he has managed to not blink first. He's blinked second. That must have been absolutely terrifying for Mark Zoidhoff to see that happen in his windscreen. And poor Luca Morelli, not only has he cooked his brakes and his tyres, he's now got Johnny Verhoff in that number 3 for company. Let's have a replay. Let's see what that looks like from Verhoff's angle. See how quickly that closes in. You just see that car go round and then he'll be... Oh, that's... Yeah, I mean... That's a brown pants moment for Verhoff as well there, and I'm sure Luca Morelli, but I'm not sure where else Luca Morelli could have gone unless he was going to be ultra polite about re-entering the track. But I think you don't get to 5,000 or 6,000 iRating by being polite on re-entries if you know that the other driver is going to let you survive. That Guevara-Andjelovic battle is done and dusted because Andjelovic was 3 seconds slower on that last lap, and that means Guevara is pretty comfortably into P3. So I wonder if that's just traffic. If we're looking on the track map, they will have gone past some GTEs in the not too distant past, but could well have been an off track for Andjelovic. He has been pushing very hard, and he is one of the lowest rated cars in this split. I mean, that's a bit of a misnomer, because to be car number 39 in a split this strong, that sort of, you know, is still a very, very good driver. It's just he's surrounded by even better drivers, and that was Schiavon getting past Frigeria. That's the first time, Sean, I think we've seen someone get past and get back into the racing line before the braking zone there. I don't know if you've seen any others. I certainly don't remember seeing. They've all been alongside into turn 1 or turn 2 so far. So I guess that means Schiavon's got some good straight line speed there.
I think I was taking a look at the LMP2 battle that was going on just before, and where both drivers were losing out is where they were fighting it deep into turn 1. What you've seen there is the defending driver giving up that corner early so he can get a better run out of the exit of the chicane, hopefully to come back for second chicane.
Yeah, this is always the danger of battling, is if you end up taking too much time about it, because if you look at their fastest laps, I mean, Angel Guevara's fastest lap, we've got a replay here of Morelli. Oh, and he's turned the number 8 and the number 14, so that's Mark Zoidhoff. Morelli's got ahead of him, but Zoidhoff's just pushing a little bit too hard there, I think. Has come round on the exit of the second chicane. Let's see what happened to Zoidhoff. So he's just gone back into the racing line, having got past the GTE, completely messed up his braking, and Morelli behind him just not reacting in time. That's, I think, a tired mind after 55 minutes of driving, and all of that hard work the two of them have done, completely undone by a small, I mean, let's call it was, a small mistake that I think all of us will have made at some point. And Johnny Verhoef has taken advantage of it, because he is now up into P9, and Patrick Svilassi here now coming past Mark Zoidhoff, who has probably picked up some damage from that. Svilassi now up 3 places from where he started. And it feels weird to say he's only the 10th strongest driver in this field, considering he's got over 5,000 iRating, but here we are. This is how strong the field is. And Luca Morelli potentially also with some damage, just a second up the road. So Svilassi, I probably wasn't expecting to make 2 places up here, but with just 4.5 minutes left on the clock, that could well be the case. And it's, again, going to come down to the wire as to whether or not we have another 3 laps or 4, because Sirica in the LMDh lead will have come past the starter lap. So we can see some spicy driving with the number 7 GTE of Michael Goss, who is still in second for the GTEs. Sirica won't be wanting that, and actually Nicholas Bowe is caught right up. He was over a second quicker on the last lap, so Bowe really confident in this car on low fuel by the looks of it. And is he going to be able to challenge for the lead in what looked like a relatively secure position for the first 55 minutes for Moreno Sirica? But he's now got Nicholas Bowe right on his tail and a bit more traffic to contend with. That number 22 LMP2, I believe that is. Who actually is that? That's Claudio Vesparelli in the lead of LMP2. He's letting Sirica through, and it's now going to be Bowe that's potentially compromised by it. And I don't think Vesparelli is going to be too gracious, because Kieran Smart has done a very good job to stay just 2 seconds behind in second of the LMP2. So, you know, he's in his own battle, really. You can see him in the background there. I don't think Christian Bowe is too happy with him doing it. You can see that aggressive snap in front of him, but I think both drivers are really going to be looking out for themselves there. It's just one of those situations where there is no winner. Well, I suppose the winners here are Sirica and Vesparelli as it stands, but we've still got 3 minutes to go as Sirica has gone over the start-finish line. It's going to be a very close run thing as to whether or not we get that extra lap, because let's not forget that the white flag falls as the clock gets to 0. So if you're just coming over the finish line with a second to go, you've got a whole extra lap to do. As we are now with Paulo Lopez, who's had a reasonably quiet race by the standards of this field. He has now got Zoidhoff, Svelasi and Morelli in front of him. Has Lopez got more straight line power in that car left than Mark Zoidhoff does? Don't forget, as Sean mentioned earlier, oh, who's that that's gone off? That is Luca Morelli, who has, I think, probably taken too much curb on the exit of the Ascari chicane. We should get a replay of this now, hopefully, so let's just see what happened there. I think just tagged the inside curb of the last of the Ascaris, and then ends up on the gravel on the exit of Ascari. And I mean, Luca Morelli was having such a good race, and the last 10 minutes have just completely undone all of his good work. He was up into P9 at one point. He is now down into P14, and let's just see if Lopez or Zoidhoff or Svelasi are looking particularly interested in making a move here. I mean, I don't think Svelasi will be, because he's the front car of this train in the yellow. And let's have a look at where Sirica is. He is just coming around the back straight now. So I think we are looking at this being the last lap he is coming onto now. He has managed to re-gap Bowe. I think that interaction with some of the traffic has cost them there. But Lopez is looking very racy with Zoidhoff, who I think the unfortunate thing for Lopez here will be is that Svelasi is going to be giving that toe to Zoidhoff, which means he's not going to be able to take complete advantage of the slipstream. Will all 4 of these cars be able to get past the GTE? Yes, with no problems whatsoever. But just look how close Lopez is getting to Zoidhoff. Zoidhoff having to defend that line. He knows he's only got a few corners left to defend, and those cars could not get much closer without touching. Lopez looking so speedy here compared to Zoidhoff, who has surely got damage after that contact with Morelli about 3 laps ago. As we come into Parabolica now, this is the only on-track battle left, but don't forget there may be some cars running out of fuel. GT on the exit of Parabolica again, just to try and compromise some of the exits here, but Lopez is only 0.2 of a second behind Zoidhoff. Zoidhoff is only 2.5 behind Svelasi. And they're all going to get closer and closer as we come into the braking zone of turn 1. Are we going to see any desperate lunges? We are not, thankfully. There is one last deep braking zone left for all 3 of these cars. It's not really the last overtaking opportunity, but it's the last obvious one left on the track now, as Moreno Sirica is going to come round to take the victory in LMDh, and Colossi in GTE not that far behind him either. In fact, Vesparelli, all 3 of our leaders are pretty much in the same quadrant of the track, and you can just see there the number 12 having had enough in the background, destroying his car. Colossi coming through as well. Vesparelli has just gone through, but I want to go back to that battle with Svelasi, Zoidhoff and Lopez, and in fact Bruno Mello has caught them up now as well. You can see him in the background there. Are we going to see any silly lunges into Ascari? Because quite frankly, it's going to come right down to the wire. You can see the number 37, that is Davide Ascetto in the LMP2. Again, that's just going to cause a little bit more drama because they are going to catch him at Parabolica. Who is going to be brave? Who is going to be stupid? Are we going to see any changes for position? And I think Ascetto has just realised what's happening, is getting well out the way. Svilassi's cleared him, and Zoidhoff clears him before we get to Parabolica, and that just compromises Paulo Lopez enough that now Bruno Mello is going to be interested, and it's going to be a drag race to the line. But I think we are all going to keep the positions we held at the start of the lap. And it doesn't seem like anyone ran out of fuel either, so that little talking point has all gone, although let's just pretend that some of these drivers stopping nice and early will be doing so. And, well, that race heated up quite a lot towards the end. And, well, that's quite interesting. Sean, I don't know, do we have any promos to run, or are we going to wait for the results to load?
Let's wait for the results to load. I think most of the cars are done now, actually, to be honest. Shouldn't take too long. One thing I just wanted to say is these hypercars that we've got this season, they really can fight close. And the battles we've seen this season have been absolutely amazing. I think it's a testament to iRacing, really, that made such a great car.
I mean, it's nice to see a sort of top split prototype, or top class prototype rather, A, with a healthy amount of drivers in it, B, actually seeing some on-track racing, because I think as lovely as the LMP1s were, the trouble with the boost situation was that you basically just ended up in this sort of boost off really, and you didn't really, it's like DRS and F1, you didn't really see big overtakes. And we can now bring you the official results for this race, with Moreno Sirica a little bit of a scare towards the end, but he led from start to finish, except for those couple of laps where the pit stops were slightly out of order. He takes P1 from Christian Bow in second, who has done a very, very good job to stay within touching distance of our race winner. Liam McNinch climbed his way up to third step on the podium, but he was 22 seconds behind Sirica, which just goes to show you just how much pace those top two had. David Jimenez, after a lengthy battle with some of the drivers around him, has come through into fourth, with Dennis Wolf in fifth, Rick Chivon sixth, Frigerio seventh, Scanferla eighth, Verhoef ninth, and Svilassi in 10th, with all but one driver staying on the lead lap, which is very good going indeed. And then in the LMP2 field, again, another relatively simple win, but with a bit of a last 10-minute scare. Claudio Visparelli, our winner, with Kieran Smart doing a very good job to stay within a second of him, and perhaps a wonder what could have been. Angel Guevara comes through in third after that big battle with Velimir Andjelovic, who has ended up in fourth. But again, he's car 39. He's done a very good job to finish as high as fourth here today, with Robert Biggs in fifth, Gregory Van Hove in sixth, Thomas Mora in seventh, Davide Occhetto in eighth, Max Kuss in ninth, and Gabriel Gabe in 10th. We lost 3 LMP2s. And then our GTE field, it was much the same story. Soren Kolosiec, well, by some distance having the simplest race, although Michael Gross was at quite a few stages within, if not touching distance, at least having to pay attention distance. But he's ended up in second, 18 seconds behind, with Marco Mendes having a very quiet race in third, Tiago Pereira in fourth, Diego Battaglia in fifth, Pete Plasto sixth, Kieran Sharp seventh, Patiglio in eighth, and then 4 laps down, Luis Sergio, 7 laps down, Matt Acton, and Junior Borges did not take the start. And that is our entire field for this evening. It's been probably a more strategic race. I don't think we're ever going to see races as action-packed as we did last week at Spa, because Spa is just quite frankly the best circuit ever. But we will be back next week at the Circuit de la Sarthe, the 24-hour Le Mans circuit, for a night race. So that should be lots and lots of fun. Well, and you don't forget, of course, you can join the community Discord. A link is in the YouTube video, so feel free to check that out if you're watching on YouTube. If you're not watching on YouTube, the replay will be there on YouTube, but the link will still be there. And of course, there is a donations link if you fancy showing us a bit of appreciation. That is entirely voluntary. I don't want to pressure anyone into doing it, especially with the current situation for so many of us. We need to save up our money for sim gear, I am sure. But that will be all from me tonight, and of course Sean Cranley Swash in the production booth and on co-commentary, and we shall see you at the same time next week.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.